Now, they've risked their lives, left behind their families and seen livelihoods destroyed. But when refugees leave war zones like Syria, what impact do they have on the economies of countries that take them in? That is one of the questions being asked at a summit hosted by the United Nations here in Istanbul. Sourav Roy was there and sent this report.
In a world of more than 7 billion people, about 250 million, or just over 3%, live outside their country of origin. Most migrants cross borders looking for a better way of life. And migration inside countries is also on the rise. While migration is an important force in development and a high priority for both developed and developing countries, this mass movement of people has given rise to xenophobia and calls for borders to be tightened. But senior UN officials say migration brings economic benefits for both the country of origin and the destination country.
Migration is a way that developing countries can acquire not just remittances, but also skills and human capital when their workers go abroad, acquire human capital and skills that can then be redeployed back at home, as well as sending back money. What this really comes down to are policies in both the countries of origin of migrants and the countries receiving migrants to maximize the benefits and minimize the cost.
But not all migrants are economic ones. Some are fleeing conflict zones and are forced to take refuge in other countries. More than 3 million people have been displaced from their homes in the region in the first half of 2016. Half of them within their own countries. But the UN says countries need to coordinate better so as to give all the help that the refugees need. Turkey is now home to more than 3 million refugees, most of them from Syria, Iraq and Afghanistan. And it's almost single-handedly bearing the cost of supporting them.
You host a refugee or an IDP, that's a strain on your water system, on your school system, on your healthcare system, on your sanitation system. Of course, those communities then need strengthened public services so that the provision of services don't go down for the host communities, are increased for host communities as well as for the refugee or IDP population.
According to the UN, poorer countries host most of those who've been forcibly displaced. The cost of sheltering refugees takes a toll on those economies. And the UN says both the developed and developing world need to cooperate to tackle the challenge. Sourav Roy, TRT World.
And Ben Slade from the UNDP joins me now in the studio. Ben, thank you ever so much for being on Money Talks. Let me start by asking you, there's been lots of research done on the positive impact of migrants on economies, but how do you change the perception of people who say that migrants take away their jobs?
Experience, it takes time, interactions between migrants or refugees and host communities to break down stereotypes, for people to connect with their common humanity, for cultural differences to give way to things that we all have in common. Right, but are those strategies really going to work in the current political climate that we have, where we've seen this rise of populism in the US and the UK and possibly even France? Mm-hmm. Well, I think questions about the right sorts of strategies, policies, and programs really need to be answered in a local context, reflecting the economic, social, cultural characteristics of the communities, the countries, et cetera. But for every country where there are difficulties taking in refugees, there are other countries where the refugees are received with open arms and where a lot of investment is made in ensuring their rights are protected, with Turkey being a great example of that. As was pointed out, something like 3 million Syrian refugees have been hosted here for going on something like 6 years now. That's a very good example. It shows that even a middle-income country like Turkey, not the wealthiest country in the world, can do a very good job in meeting the needs of refugees if there's an interest and a commitment. So for every time you say the glass is half empty, you can also say the glass is half full. Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that issue, and in particular about funding programs. Big donors like the US are now saying they're going to scale back foreign aid.
how are you ever going to bridge the gap that you already have when big governments are saying these kinds of things?
Well, for a long time, it's been the case that development assistance, at best, can only galvanize other sources of funds. For example, with migration, the amount of remittances that labor migrants send back for many years has been much, much greater than development assistance from rich countries to poor countries. So the question is, how can development assistance be used to leverage other funds, be this remittances, be this trade, be this investments, charitable funding from private sources. To do development these days, you have to tap into all of those funds and to use them as efficiently and as synergistically as possible.
One of the findings that I find particularly interesting is that the effect of migration, as we've said, can be positive for host economies, but it can also be very positive for the countries that migrants leave behind. Explain to us a little bit about that effect.
In the globalized world, when you leave someplace, there's no reason that you can't go back. And even if you leave, you're only a Skype call away. You can send money back with the touch of a computer keyboard or screen. And so connectivity is made distances shorter, and it's possible for a doctor who leaves Africa to go to practice, say, in the UK, to still deliver medical services through the internet to people with internet access in Africa, which of course was impossible 10 or 15 years ago. So technology and globalization are changing what is possible and what is difficult, as well as sometimes creating new difficulties and problems for other reasons.
Ben Slay, Senior Strategic Advisor at the UNDP, thank you ever so much for being on Money Talks.
Thank you.